Shut up and let's get on.
Yeah, before Ben gets the podcast sued, let's move on.
Before Ben has an aneurysm.
Yeah, and if anybody can piss off Ben anymore along the way, that'd be great. No, it's all right, Ben. That was fun.
Well, my topic is it's not music related actually, and it's kind of an extension of our conversation about appreciation and how important it is to teach our students and how we're responsible for teaching our students to appreciate a wide variety, and in our case, all of our cases, a wide variety of percussion, and maybe also as professors, just music in general. But also the non-musical aspect of that is appreciating each other as people and appreciating that people come from a wide variety of backgrounds. And this has been on my mind so much lately because of what's going on in St. Louis. I'm living in Columbia, and you've probably heard St. Louis in the news the past few weeks. And when I put together this topic, it was a couple weeks ago when we were in the thick of all of this. But basically what happened in Ferguson 2 years ago has, we have another case of a black man being shot by a white police officer and no justice coming from it. And so there were a lot of protests in St. Louis 2 weeks ago. And I have one particular article of a story that I love. It is about this pizza owner, this pizza shop owner. It's a great pizza place called Pie in St. Louis. Have you guys ever eaten there? Obama went there, so it's good. And this pizza store is in a very popular area called the Central West End, and the owner is named Chris Summers, and he was concerned about his store because all these protests were happening near his store. And let me just read you the intro to this article. On Friday, and by Friday this means this article was published on Wednesday, September 20th. So a few weeks ago. On Friday, Pie Pizzeria was gassed by St. Louis police officers who were marching through the neighborhood after protests took an ugly turn a bit further west. Owner Chris Summers was there. Yesterday, the pro-police group Blue Lives Matter put Summers on blast for his response, and the union representing St. Louis County police officers shared the link that echoed the call on its Facebook page. There are reports of people calling the restaurants, tying up their phone lines, expressing their feelings about the owner's anti-police comments. We have been busy protesting everyone's free speech during the demonstrations. Here are numbers if you feel like your freedom of speech needs a little exercise, the police union posted, and shared numbers for Pie locations. And Summers posted a response on his Facebook page telling his story, and it's in this article. You can go find it. It's in the Riverfront Times if you'd like to read it. But he explains the series of events, and he was out offering water to protesters and police officers and just everyone in the nights before that. And here he was kind of violently approached, and it was not a good situation for him, and it forced him to be put in the shoes of someone else, basically, because he's saying, to paraphrase him, he's saying, I felt for one moment what it was like to be a black man, or what it might have been like to be a black man, in a confrontation with a white police officer. And so that article was very meaningful for me, and what's happening on our campus at the University of Missouri also, where we have had a lot of protests 2 years ago. And because of those protests, there has been a lot of talk about diversity. It's the new buzzword on campus. And I don't know if that's the same for you guys at your schools, but we have diversity classes, and there's a diversity initiative, and allegedly more funding for making diverse events happen. And so I enrolled in one of these online classes called Diversity 101. And it's actually been really eye-opening because there are a lot of great materials that are shared there, and also it just gives you the opportunity to express what you're thinking and feeling about these articles, in discussion boards with people, and it's very helpful. But it's made me think about, or kind of learn a little bit more about things such as unconscious bias and privilege, microaggressions. And I took a survey. It's actually a BuzzFeed survey. There's a Harvard one as well, but it was recommended in this class about how privileged are you. And as I'm taking, it's like 100 questions. And as I'm taking the survey, I'm like, oh, wow, okay, I lived in a foreign country and I was the minority for a year. And I like to travel and I'm interested in music from all around the world. Like maybe my score is not going to be so bad. And of course it came out, I'm white, I'm straight, I'm, middle class. And so I'm extremely privileged. And we talk about in this module about how it's easy to get defensive when you're telling someone that they're privileged, but it's very important to be aware of that, and it positions yourself in a different place in the argument. So I guess the question I have for you guys, because this is a little bit more of a rant and just kind of what's happening in my mind recently, but I'm curious to maybe start a short discussion about what is diversity. And I have come to know now that diversity is much more than about race and gender equality, but it's much, much more than that. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that. Sorry for rant.
No, good rant. Thanks, Megan. It's I wrote a long Facebook post recently about a incident. Well, I guess it was an incident. It's probably not that uncommon of a thing, but it really, man, it shook me up. It really bothered me so much. And it was one of those rare life moments where you can feel your opinion shift right there and then. It's a general arts class, and all the freshmen who are on a specific scholarship track attend this arts class, and they stay in this one dorm, and it's great because they're dancers, theater majors, musical theater music. They are design and graphic arts, and what am I leaving out? I'm sure I'm leaving out something. But the idea is that they all take this class together, and they get to learn about each other's disciplines. And there are 2 instructors for every section. So I'm teamed up with a metal sculptor, Mark Rooker, who I've talked about on the podcast before, and he's the guy whose art is going on the moon. If you guys remember that? Mm-hmm. So he and I, we volunteer for this class. We don't get any hours off our load for doing it. It's totally volunteer. And Mark and I said, hey, we enjoyed doing this so much last semester that we'll volunteer to do it again if we can be teamed up again. So of course they said, yeah, hell yeah, go ahead. So he brought in a guest speaker to talk about this play called Equus. And Equus is a famous play from the 70s and deals with some really sensitive issues of sexuality, success, your life goals. What else was that so much about?
Mental health.
Therapy.
The effects of doctrines being forced upon you, and
a lot of sensitive things, not easy to do. And our guest speaker, she was so excited to be there, and she said, oh, I can't wait. I know all about this play, and I know all about it both in today's context and in the context it was written, and I'm so excited to be teaching again. And man, the first 40 minutes or so were excellent. She was just a fantastic teacher until they started talking about how society views therapy and treatment for mental illness. And she was just putting across the points and questions of the play, all right, of this work of art. And some of the students got offended, as if they were personal attacks, or as if the questions the play is asking are attacks on them. And they are attacks on the concept, sure, but they were taking those personal attacks. And it just got really unpleasant towards the end. And one student said something about, I don't feel like this is a safe space. And it was that buzzword, safe space. And it just really rattled me. It's like, wait a minute, we're talking about this content and what the play says. This doesn't have to get personal, but yet it got personal. So I don't know. I mean, it's not exactly a diversity issue, but it is definitely about inclusion. And when do you draw the line about certain topics and not? I mean, is it a violation to not include certain composers from different cultures or not? Like, where do we figure that out? And the conclusion I've come to in my mind is just, okay, this is a good concept that hasn't fully matured yet, because some people will say, well, safe space, yes, we all want to be literally safe. Nobody disagrees there. And inclusion, yes, we want everyone to be included. We don't want to exclude anybody for their race or sex or sexual preference or anything. Yet we all agree you should be able to participate in the discussion and be there. That's inclusion in my mind. But is inclusion also, hey, you talked about Beethoven instead of William Grant Still? Like, because I didn't talk about a, African-American composer, does that mean I'm not including? You know what I mean? It seems like the verbiage is really muddy.
Yeah, and I think like having conversations about these new buzzwords also, because safe space, that student was probably incorrect there, because the classroom is not a safe space anymore. It's not a safe space because we're, as professors and as students, we're mandatory reporters. So if something's said that needs to be reported to the Title IX office or whatever, I don't know if you guys had to go through all this training and stuff, but like the classroom is not a safe space. So
well, that's good to know.
What is a safe? What are we talking about? Are we talking about a safe space as like there's not going to be a mass shooter safe, like physically safe space? Or, it's
right. Well, I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly where the problem, I think, is. There's confusion on the verbiage. Mm-hmm. Like, what does inclusion mean and what does safe space mean? Because, I think in the case of my recent class experience, I was there. I watched the whole thing. The student was wrong. The student bullied the teacher, in my mind. That's what I saw. The teacher was... It was just sad. I watched her go having all this excitement and knowledge, and she was way prepped, and man, just kind of squashed it at the end. And she said, "I'm excited to be teaching again. I'm so thrilled to be teaching again." And it was like, man, it was sad by the end of it.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's no problem in asking controversial questions, but it sounds like the student should have phrased it in a much different way. And going back to the word appreciation, that did not happen in that situation.
No, well, and it's very clear, like, you have mistaken this idea of my voice is silenced and this isn't a safe space with I'm not comfortable, which is such a different experience and issue. And it's insulting to people who've actually been through things to where the word safe space actually means something. Yeah.
Well, I think it's really hard, and us as teachers and musicians, we got to ask ourselves, a lot of this music that we're studying, I'm always amazed when I get an email from a student, hey, I attend somewhere super strict university and I'm playing a piece of yours, and the title, this has happened more than once, the title is Wicca, for example, and I'm worried about programming the piece because of the title, and it's another religion, and it's a pagan religion, and it's I'm not sure. And my response is like, damn, what music can you play? You can't play Christopher.
It's certainly good music that we like. Sounds like.
Right. Yeah, I guess it's like, man, that must be really hard to study art of any sort when you're not allowed to even like mention those other terms, or that must be really difficult. So I don't know if everyone's going to be offended around every corner, man, good luck studying any opera. Good luck studying. There's just not much you're going to be able to study, I think.
I know. Well, and to bring it, kind of back to what Megan was saying about diversity, I think that's become a big deal on our campus. I imagine it is everywhere, but, we're about an hour and a half from Charlottesville, and we know the events that took place there. Just a little bit ago. I've noticed that the term diversity and the kind of the concept and the worry from institution type entities it seems to be pretty rampant. Like, different arts organizations that provide grants, for example, they've said pretty blanketly, we're giving away this percentage to, diverse applications. It's like, well, wait, what does that mean? I'm not quite sure what that means And does that, I mean, I'm white and the composer that I want to commission is white, so I guess I won't apply because I figure that's not what you mean. You know what I mean? And that's fine. That's completely their prerogative to do.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like diversity is so much more than skin color.
Yeah.
And, you know, we just have to hope that arts organizations or these granting institutions are, you know, actually funding diverse projects and not just a narrowed meaning of the word diverse, I guess.
Yeah, and it's so hard to know. And you don't know. You know, you're just kind of... Yeah, and it makes me question, like, shoot, am I doing the wrong kinds of projects? Or, you know, because I'm not doing something that is about bringing this other culture into the limelight of what I do. And, like, well, I don't know, but that's, like, my passion is for this very specific thing. And it seems like I'm most useful to the world if I go after that, not if I just try to intentionally collaborate with a certain person because they're of, like, the Baha'i faith and that's different than me, or, you know, they're Muslim and that's different than me. Yeah, something like that. So I don't know, it makes me just really meditate on some of my choices, I guess, but I'm not quite sure what the right answer is.
Man, way to go, Megan. In 10 minutes, you just bummed everybody out.
I know. Sorry, everyone. Do our guests have any comments on this, or shall we move on?
Looks like Ben has something to add.
Yeah, I was just going to say really quickly, one thing that was interesting to me, especially being in the conservative state of Texas here, in my sort of introductory meeting with the department chair here, I was told that I don't remember the exact verbiage, but it was something along the lines of, like, you have complete artistic freedom and you can do a controversial piece and we will back you up as a, you know, it's an art project. It's not political policy, in so many words. So
that's nice.
I thought that was interesting here.
Yeah,
that is
that's
nice. Yeah. Well, and in the case of Casey's class, it seems, it's just almost a maturity issue of a person being able to separate, can I objectively consider a viewpoint or a concept without tying it to my personal identity, or thinking that because it's different than how I personally identify, that it rips that to pieces. And of course, we know the answer is no. And I don't know.
Someone in the comments on Casey's thing mentioned the word civility. Like, I think that you can have wildly differing viewpoints, but still be civil about it.
And again, that's one of those clerical issues that it would have been nice to have everyone on the same page on. Mm-hmm. Like, what you know, we're having civility, but we're talking about something controversial. But the controversy, even if it does relate to you personally, it's not a personal attack. And that's not an opinion. That's a fact. The play is about this. And you might have something to do with that in your actual life. But we're not talking about you right now. We're talking about this play and why it's in the canon and why it was important in the 70s. And, you know, it's like, dude, we got to be able to teach that, you know. And I guess I fear for the content. I would be so sad if we couldn't teach this important stuff, you know.
I think if I just add something really quick, I read your post about that yesterday. I was trying to think about, as we were talking about, I was trying to think of a response, but I think it's kind of simply boiled down to basically what you just said, which is a communication about, this is what's happening. This is what we're about to talk about. Get ready.
Yeah.
And prepare. And, you know, I know you weren't necessarily in charge of the class. I don't know if that happened. But something that we, meaning Joe and Michael and I, would do a lot of the time if we're teaching, because if you go back to our album and listen to the first big suite and the last suite, it's all religious music. Mm-hmm. And it's all music that a lot of people might look at as satanic or evil, and it's simply because they're not informed about it. You know, it's a lot of it is music of what people consider Santeria, and it's something that if you don't know about it, it can seem scary or foreign or weird or unusual. And I think we're, in a way, I'm thinking full circle back to earlier about, like, well, if you do your homework and you're informed about it and you give your students a very informed perspective, and you communicate that informed perspective, I think in the end, all should be good. Mm-hmm. And then my other comment was, about that particular student who seemed to be offended or had that particular comment, I think a lot of us who run percussion programs or are part of a percussion program have like something called studio class or seminar or whatever you want to call it, where everyone gets together and maybe you play for each other and then people can give comments. I think of something like that as a really key time to teach my students how to give comments about other students playing. Mm-hmm. And I think about a situation like Casey had where, I'm not saying go back and do this but maybe you have to pull that particular student aside and be like, can we talk about how to address things and how to say things and how to the words that you can use in a situation like this? Because saying the word, I don't feel safe, everyone's probably creeped out by it. Everyone probably feels uncomfortable because somebody said, well, I'm not in a safe space. And it's like everyone's got a different meaning of that. Well, what does that mean?
Exactly.
And it shuts down everything as soon as somebody says that.
It's very uncomfortable. So I think,
go ahead. And what you said is what we did. My colleague said, okay, wait, time out. And then he and I both said, just relax. This is about the play, not about all of us.
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
If there's still tension, okay, well, what do you mean? Have them elaborate and all that kind of stuff. And it's hard in some of those situations because when the room freezes, you don't know what to do. Or, somebody tells you that somebody's snare drum roll was bad and everyone's like, oh, can I say that it was bad? We're in a place where we can grow from this and you can learn to say, not that it's bad, but here's some ways to work on your snare drum roll or fill in the blank.
Right. Joe, what do you got there?
Well, I wanted to add on to what Mixtacki was saying and reference something that Laurel said a while ago. It was probably 10 minutes ago at this point, but she brought up the word discomfort or uncomfortable situations in teaching and tie that into what Mixtacki is saying. When we're teaching percussion classes or even lessons, particularly when we're teaching musics that are not familiar to our students from cultures they might not be familiar with, that we have an obligation as teachers to set the stage of going, sometimes education and learning can be uncomfortable, and that doesn't necessarily equate to a personal attack or an attack on safety or safe spaces or the ability to speak your mind and your own opinions, but it's good to be presented with these new ideas. So when students come in for a conga lesson or a bata lesson or to learn about music and culture that they haven't been exposed to yet, there can be a little bit of discomfort there getting approached with new ideas and different worldviews. And I think as educators, it's on us to set the stage for that and go, yeah, this might be difficult for many people in the room. And as long as we're all going in with that mindset that it isn't personal attacks, it can help mitigate those situations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and that's
sure.
when there's room to grow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and of course the universal counter argument to this is universities should challenge your opinions. That's how your opinions do grow and they do change. And you should, if you just feel safe all the time, you're not learning to combat challenges. And, of course, there's a good rationale to that.
And to put, to tie it back into diversity, if you just hang out with people who are exactly like you and think just like you, you're not making steps in learning about the world.
Yeah,
People,
I like to put it to Michael Spiro. Is this a thing you've seen change in your teaching career? Because I know we've seen it kind of appear, but we're also haven't been teaching very long.
That's a really good question. I've been thinking about that actually through this whole conversation. I come a few years after free speech movement in Berkeley, but I am very much a product of the late 60s. And, Vietnam War, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Cesar Chavez. This is just to explain context. I was very much a political activist, spent some time in jail, blah, 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 fighting for the causes that I believed in. And those, of course, had relates to this whole issue of speech. And, when you're being tear gassed and billy clubbed by a policeman, that's not exactly a safe space. So, I think this is the reason I haven't said anything is because this is very complex, and I certainly don't have any of the answers. On the one hand, if we don't allow for open and frank debate, then speech, for example, even against the current president of the United States, how do you know they're not knocking at your door tomorrow and locking you up? By the same token, can you go too far? Yeah. I mean, aren't we supposed to challenge each other in an institution? Aren't we supposed to be able to simply, on the basis of pure argument, be able to succeed in taking the alt-right and completely shutting them down by virtue of the error of their views, not because we can kick their ass or prevent them from speaking. I would just as soon let them speak in a lot of cases and just go make it, and it's just manifest that these are goons, buffoons, and have no intellectual argument to bear. So if you say, well, we have to have a safe space and you can't say that, whatever that might be, I don't know where this all comes out, but I think, Casey, the quick answer to your question is, yeah, on the one hand, I think I have seen things change. I thought it was for the better, because I thought that both race and gender in the last 50 years that we had been making progress. Then we had an election in 2016, and that has made me question all of that. And that's all kidding aside, a major tragedy in my life. It's as if the last 50 years of history never happened. And the progress in race, gender, et cetera, it's as if somehow somebody took a knife and cut out a radiator hose and then just pretended those 50 years never happened. And I think that while, for example, let's talk briefly, let's say sexual misconduct. I have every course syllabus that I submit has to have 3 paragraphs in it about sexual misconduct. That's probably a good thing. I mean, but then when do you get to the point where nobody can say anything to anybody about any topic? Now, not sexual misconduct, but anything, culture, race, gender, an idea, an opinion, for fear that you might, lose your job. I mean, one of the things, and then I promise I'll shut up, I'm not trying to go on and on, but tenure was, of course, supposed to be to protect opinions that were counter to the norm, ideally based on data, on research. My research tells me that in this topic, et cetera, and the need for tenure was not just so you could then say, oh, I got a job for life, time to get drunk every day when I go to class. It was to protect speech and protect your ability to do research in the academy unfettered. I don't know if we're allowed to speak our minds anymore. And again, don't we believe that our ideas we should win by virtue of the fact that our ideas are correct and that our ideas are based on true ethics and true values, not just because I won't allow you to speak? I don't know about that. That's a problem. And yet hate speech is hate speech. Charlottesville, Yeah, how do we allow it? Do we not allow it? I don't have any answers to that, to any of it.
Yeah, well, and I reported a good chunk episodes ago now about the notion of, I got disinvited from campus, and my name's Ann Coulter, and because I got disinvited, thus my free speech is being violated, and that's just not true. That's not that's not a violation of free speech. It only affects you from arrest. It doesn't, you can kick someone out of your home for saying, I don't like what you're talking about, you got to leave, but you can't arrest them for what they say. That's what it actually means. Mm-hmm. But I'm glad you mentioned tenure. My father's mentioned this too. My dad's a math professor in Utah, and he's well over retirement age. He's 70 something, but he's still teaching and loves teaching. And yeah, like tenure means a different thing now. It seems like the original spirit of it was, so you've proven yourself academically, and now we trust your word as well as the rest of the academy and the rest of academia. And your word is, in fact, what the academy is. So if you choose to teach from a different book than the prescribed book for the class, you have tenure. You should be able to do that. You've proven your knowledge we trust that decision. And I like that you said, are we not free to express our own feelings? I'm worried that's, from my experience in the class, I'm worried that's not even the worst thing at stake. I'm worried it's the content we're trying to teach is at stake. Try to teach Strauss opera.
Like Salome.
Yeah, try to teach Salome. Like, there's some heavy sexual misconduct in that, where someone imagines a severed head doing some sexual deeds. Like, wait, like, I mean, not that I'm dying to teach that, but that's in the canon, man. Like, the canon is very confrontational and is very, I just want us to keep being able to do what we're doing, Anywho, do you want to do your topic?
Sure, I can.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead, Laurel?
Yeah. So something I often do with you all is share a book that I've read. And what I'm going to share today is one of my favorite books called The Highly Sensitive Person by Elaine Aron, who's a psychologist. It may or may not feed into the conversation we've been having. We'll just see. I was inspired to write about this on my blog recently when my duo partner said that one of her private piano students was just taken from his regular elementary school class and put into a special class because he was called too sensitive. Like, he was too sensitive to not doing well on an assignment, or if he was disciplined for something, he would get really upset. It just hit him very hard. And it was odd to me that he would then be put into a separate class, as if that was like some type of handicap for him to be a sensitive person.
Safety class or something.
Yeah, and so then I just thought, like, I want to talk about this book. So what does it mean to be a highly sensitive person? It's essentially a person who observes a lot, and basically you notice more about any given situation, whether it's artistic, natural, social, or something with some confrontation. You notice more about it than other people, and are therefore perhaps more overwhelmed more easily.
And is it a clinical term? This person is highly sensitive?
It's become that. Yeah. Elaine Aron kind of coined the term in the 90s, and it's become much more part of a regular psychological conversation now. And through different studies, they estimate that about 20% of the population identifies as being really sensitive. About 20% is not sensitive at all. So yeah, the complete opposite end of the spectrum. But most people are, that 60% have what we consider just completely average, normal behavior about these things. I'm a highly sensitive person, which I think is something I've always known about myself. But when I found this book, it was such a relief, because I looked at Casey years ago and I said, it's like she knows me. Just because everything she was saying rang so true. So if you're out there listening, here are 4 ideas that Elaine Aron says will resonate with you if you're another HSP, highly sensitive person. Has to do with the depth of your processing. You think about things for a really long time. You get overstimulated easily because you absorb things so deeply, so that might come out socially as you don't always really enjoy big gatherings. You like small ones. You have an emphasis to empathy and emotion. And then lastly, you're really sensitive to subtle things. So, for example, high contrasts, whether it's in something visual, like your clothes, or a piece of art, you're not quite as drawn to as things that mix together more subtly and are about nuance. To just draw this to music, like, you probably work better alone. And so a lot of people in the arts tend to be highly sensitive people because of these characteristics that we have. Like, we think about things really deeply. We have an appreciation for the human condition and for investigating sort of the emotional journeys of different pieces as objectively as we can. We might be very critical, like super critical of ourselves. And so when the slightest criticism comes from somebody else, it feels like a much bigger deal than it is. You know, like Michael said, like, yeah, your buzz roll sucks. Like, someone who's not highly sensitive might be like, yeah, I know. But someone who's really, really sensitive might be like, I know, I was working on it, but I know it's really bad. I probably just shouldn't do any of this. You know, and it just kind of devolves because it hits in a much stronger way. If you are interested to know if that might be you, there is a website. If you just like Google highly sensitive person, Elaine Aron, Aron, you'll find her website, and you can take one of these self-tests to figure out if it's you. But I think something that has been very useful to me, and I've shared this book with, a handful of people, and everyone has benefited from it in the sense that, like, gives you a way to discuss and sort of proactively combat your sensitivity at certain times. Like, I'm really sensitive, and I've had to learn that having a disagreement with someone doesn't mean it's the end of the world, or, you know, a topic being discussed that I don't like that makes me uncomfortable. It's my job, because it's my brain, to figure out how to deal with that, instead of thinking that others around me need to adapt to the fact that I'm highly sensitive. No, I'm the one that is like that, and I can figure out what I need to do. And I guess in that way it connects to me, to the student in the class that was like, this is not a good place, this is not safe. It's like, no, dude, it's on you to figure out how you can interact with the world. And in this case, like, what's happening around you is actually not combative in any way.
And has nothing to do with you.
And has nothing to do with you. Yeah. And from the book, that's the best thing I've gotten, is just this kind of sense of self-care of like, yeah, sometimes I need to stay home. Sometimes I just need to take myself out of a situation because there's too much going on, and I can deal with it tomorrow. There is just a couple of little quotes I wanted to share, simply because the world we live in is not one where highly sensitive folks and introverts are usually front and center. We're not usually leaders. You know, and to reference again the recent election that Spiro brought up, it wasn't about who seems to think the deepest about this, who seems to be really affected by these decisions. It was just who was the loudest.
You don't think it was about who had like the best ideas, like knew the best, had the best stances on policy?
Yeah, but it was about, yeah, just who's willing to put a personality on display, and that's kind of what it became. I think Elaine writes about it really well. For example, our culture has an idea of competition in the pursuit of excellence that can make anyone not striving for the top feel like a worthless, non-productive bystander. And this applies not only to a career, but, you know, even to your leisure. Like, are you fit enough? Are you progressing in your hobby? Are you competent as a cook or a gardener? And she says there's a reason that HSPs tend to drive so hard and always stay busy, and it's because they're very intuitive, which usually translates to a steady stream of creative ideas, and you want to express them. So very much how, we artistic folks can often identify with this. And just to close, she has a really lovely quote from Carl Jung. She says, "Introverts are living evidence that this rich and varied world, with its overflowing and intoxicating life, is not purely external, but also exists within. Their life teaches more than their words. Their lives teach the other possibility, the interior life, which is so painfully wanting in our civilization."
It seems like an important thing for musicians because especially if you're a student, you're criticized all the time.
Yeah.
It's just like a constant, do this the other way. Nope, do that way. No, you didn't practice enough. And yeah, it would be a harder road if you were one of these folks for sure. Yeah. Thanks, Laurel.
Oh, sure.
I disagree with you in one thing, Laurel.
Yeah.
I don't think it's all up to you, you know? I mean, I think that's it's the job of people in musical communities and learning communities and relationships to, understand, to learn about people and to listen and to observe, and to observe and to learn to interact with all different personality types. So
and recognize that other people have this.
Of course, yeah.
And adjust. Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Oh yeah, ideally. Yeah.
Yeah, but the good advice. Yeah, good advice might be, coming from someone with it, good advice might be, hey, don't expect everyone to do that for you. But Megan, yeah, of course you're right.
Yeah.
People should.
Or people are gonna think you're weird, and
there should be empathy.
Yeah, that's why I'm very grateful for a friend here in Harrisonburg. Her name is Jess. She'll be like, "Hey, do you want to do this today?" I'll be like, "Yeah, maybe tonight." And then she'll text me later, and I'll say, I just have to stay home. I'm sorry. And she totally gets it.
Yeah.
And that's all it takes. And you become very thankful for those kinds of things. And yeah, sometimes I just don't go to stuff. Like if I'm not comfortable around a certain group of people, I just don't go.
Sometimes I just don't teach my lessons because I'm not comfortable.
Yes, so we've heard.
Right? That's okay, right, guys? Like sometimes I just go like, I'm not comfortable doing this. Yeah. I'm just going to take a week off.
I'm actually
ask your promotion committee how that's working out for you.
I mean, related to what Casey said, actually, if a student walks into a lesson and hasn't practiced at all, I'm like, I'm not teaching you. So. But it's funny hearing Laurel talk about this and people being willing to accept criticism and be observed and that sort of thing. When I was in grad school, one summer I sold appliances at Sears to pay my rent, and I was shocked at how offended the other salesmen would get if you watched them make a sale. I'm not talking about like hovering, just like from across the way to see what their technique or whatever was, because in music, I guess we're technically competing against each other, but I've never been offended if anyone's asked me how to do a buzz roll or something like that.
Well, I think we're coming kind of towards the end here, so I'll probably skip my what's the sound thing today, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give everyone a clue. No, is that going to work? No, that's not going to work because they're not going to hear it. Never mind. Edit that out. Let's see.
How about we end on a guest sort of question or something like that?
Yeah, I was going to do another term.
You know what? We haven't actually done Matthew Henry's question, have we?
Oh, you're right. Oh, and that's actually kind of related. Yeah, we have a question from Matt. Go, Ben. Just go.
So related to what we're talking about here, a question for our guests to kind of close on here. We had a wonderful Facebook question from Matthew Henry, who says, I would like to hear the gents speak about their experience with the concept of cultural appropriation as it pertains to their study, performance, and teaching.
Want to start that off?
Be my guest.
This is a very long conversation. One we've been having for, 10 years now. Spiro and I, and Mixtacki as well, when he was working with us here in Bloomington and now from afar, have a way to try and keep everything in check for ourselves as we're doing our studies. And that's always taking our work down to our teachers and going, are we doing this right? Do you approve of this? Do we have your blessing? what do you think? Are we okay to teach this to our students? So always taking the material that we're learning from our master teachers and going back to them and checking in as often as we can, making sure that there's open lines of communication, and that we're always honoring them through the work we're doing, and also that our students know our lineage, know that we're just one element in that ladder of education. I think that's something we always strive to do, to make sure that we're not just taking something from somebody and running away with it. You guys want to add into that? I'm sure you do.
Mike, go.
I mean, in a sense, I think when we think cultural appropriation, we think something like, I guess I'll go back to my history of rock class, somebody like Pat Boone playing, Little Richard songs, where we think of it as like, oh man, there's just like, that is not the original, like, wow, this is, so in a sense, exactly. I echo what Joe said about, if you're coming from a place of respect, you're not doing it the wrong way. If you're coming from a place of education, from a place of depth to background, and pretty much everything we've talked about, which is, do you know what you're doing? Have you done your homework? Have you spent the years discussing and playing and figuring out problems and finding new problems and then solving those? Have you come to this place where you can make informed decisions about what you do and still honor the traditions themselves, honor the people that you learned them from, and honor all of, the hundreds of years of history? I think that's what we try to do with everything we play. I think that's something that we really strive to do with the music that we do, whether it be from Cuba, Brazil, Trinidad, or anywhere else, that we want to make sure that it sounds as good as possible and as informed as possible. So Joe is certainly right. I mean, the other half of this is that, it's been maybe 4 or 5 years since we did it, but the three of us actually, and another friend of ours, Neeraj Mehta, who all went to Havana and Matanzas, Cuba together, to really just say, okay, we know this much about this one topic, but we want to know this much, or we'd like to know as much more as possible. So that is just to say that we still continue to study this music to this day, when we can, however we can, because it's sort of a never-ending process. So I hope that solves any issue of somebody, might maybe thinking of the negative connotation of cultural appropriation, which is, oh, you're doing a disservice to this music by playing somebody else's music from a different culture. Well, we hope that we're not only sort of, if you will, meeting the standard of what that music should be, but then putting maybe our own creative take on it that still gives it the respect that it deserves.
Yeah, but there's a much deeper issue with cultural appropriation, which is people taking other people's music and then they make the money off it, and the people, the original people don't. I think Megan spoke about that when she talked about bringing Shona people to the school, not only to expose her students, but to actually put some dollars in their pocket, because they need the bread. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it's everything from all of these components go into the package of, are you appropriating, or are you conscious and aware of the various things, so that if master artist A happens to be in the United States for some reason, yeah, you can get the grant from your school to bring them to you, and or you can just come out of your own wallet and bring them to your school, because guess what? You got a gig teaching their music. Yeah. So tithe yourself, take some ducats out of your wallet and bring that person to your campus. And in turn, you're servicing your students and you're putting $1 in there. But there's a million ways to, in other words, address the issue of cultural appropriation And I think that to deny the economic reality is naive as well. So I thought I would throw that in there.
And that ties in. Megan was talking about earlier with privilege, and all of us sitting on this podcast right now are white American educators, and Mixtacki, Spiro, and I don't know, some of you as well, probably study musics that are not of our culture, whatever our culture would be. So we owe it to ourselves, our students, and the people who are graciously teaching us these musics to be as involved with them as possible, as Spiro said, financially, economically, also educationally, any way we possibly can.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, so well said. Just one quick question about Cuba. Can you tell us about the difficulties or the accessibility of getting visas to go study in Cuba and how you've dealt with that throughout the years?
Well, actually, I've been going to Cuba since 1984. Mm-hmm. Almost every year except when my son was born. And, the kids get in the way of your life and you have to be a father and stuff. So I didn't go for the first 4 years of my kid's life, but the rest of the time, almost every year I go. The thing is that if you're an educator, it has always been legal to go to Cuba to do research in your own field.
Okay.
Always. With the quote-unquote assumption, presumption, I forget what the tobacco and firearms law actually says, because it's the Office of Tobacco and Fire. It's because of the economic blockade. As long as there is some reasonable assumption that you will publish your findings. Well, you're a musician, so if you write a piece of music, you arrange a piece of music, you record a piece of music, you are publishing your findings.
Yeah.
So actually, I've just, for 30-some, however long it's been, almost 40 years, I just get on a plane and go.
Yeah.
And I know that's probably not very helpful to most people, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
Mike might want to speak about his experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Joe, you've been at least 3 or 4 times, right?
I think 4 now, at least.
Yeah. I've only been twice, but the first time was actually in the middle of my grad studies at IU, and it was the same thing. It's as long as I can prove that that I'm studying and I'm a professional. Well, I guess at that time I was a student, but here's my research. This is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Basically, I just kind of had all my recording devices and stuff ready in case anyone asked any questions, but they didn't. It was actually surprisingly easy. The second time when we all went together, it was the same thing. At that time, it was, things were much more lax, actually, than I think maybe where they're going now. Mm-hmm. We had no issues at all. It was literally the same. We'd give the same sort of short answered advice, which is, I think you can just get on a plane and go, as long as you're going for research purposes. If you're going to be a tourist, it can look a little bit different. If you get stopped and people are asking you, well, why did you go? What were you doing? Who did you see? I think you can run into some issues there. But I feel like if you have proof, and if you literally can go, well, here's my recording device and I'm this, and even if you bring some kind of documentation about what you're doing, or like if you have a grant, or if you have any kind of support from your institution, I think if you bring that, I think things are good.
Cool.
I can't like say that and then somebody can blame me later for getting stopped by.
No, the one thing though is that right now, even travel agencies who deal specifically with Cuba, they can't even answer your question right now.
Yeah.
Because like everything else, Mr. Orangehead makes everything so I will, I won't, I could, I couldn't, I might not. So they don't even know. I'm not speaking now about professionals like, musicians who want to go, but the average person as a tourist. A year ago when they opened up the embassy in La Habana, like almost basically anybody could go as a tourist. And now I don't think that the head of travel agency X in Miami knows the answer as to whether you can go or not. Yeah. It's completely up in the air.
Yeah.
I was curious. When do you declare, or how do you declare you're doing? You should be allowed to go because you're doing research. I tried the same thing when I was, I guess, 12 years old. I tried to sneak into an R-rated movie. It's like, hey, it's all right. Here's my recording device. Don't worry about it. I'm
You're
doing
going to
research.
publish your findings? That's the real question.
Yeah, it's like you're interfering with my research. This is important research.
No, you declare it when you actually book your ticket. Then you get sent to an online thing, and then you have to. Then there's all these categories of what is and isn't legal, and then you click on the category that applies to you. And the problem is that basically every week the government decides that category doesn't exist anymore, or it does, or nobody knows. It is, in fact, extremely confusing.
Man, I would be afraid to get stuck, if you go there, and obviously you guys are very comfortable there, but I'd be scared of, okay, I got there, but the rules are going to change again and I won't get home or something,
Well, no, because there is the thing of what is it? You can't pass you're not guilty for a law they passed after you did the thing. Whatever that legal term is.
Gotcha.
So, in other words, there were people when Trump came. He in the beginning of the summer said, "Okay, we're going to change it so you can't whatever it was." But if you had already bought your ticket, then you were cool. It's after a certain date that applies. But that's what makes it so confusing.
That might be the only reasonable thing he's ever said.
Yeah. No cost, dude. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, guys, we're out of time, but real quick, like I said, we wanted to do this episode with these three percussionists and experts because we do want to celebrate their CD. Would you guys maybe just say something quick about the CD that we didn't think to ask, or something that got left out in these hours that you think people should know? Quick plug.
Mixtacki, take it away.
I love it. I'm only on like half of it, or like a portion of it.
You're on a lot of it, though.
When I had the opportunity to record, I only heard kind of bits and pieces, and then when I heard the full thing in its entirety, I was like, I had a feeling it was going to sound as cool as it did. So I'm really proud of those two on the other end. It's actually their names on the CD. I just happened to be singing some lead vocals on it, but I guess I can also proudly say that I helped with some arrangements that we performed a long time ago that, got kind of morphed a little bit, but then finally documented. So I love the way that it sounds in general. There's so many little intricacies. That's the word I'm looking for. That, whether you're like sort of being introduced to this music, or if you're an expert in it, I think you'll have a fun time listening to it multiple times in a row, because there's a lot of little details that I know those two worked many, many hours to put together. So it's pretty awesome. There's a lot of really creative moments to it that I knew to expect, but like I said, when I got a chance to listen to the whole thing, I was really, really impressed, and we're really proud of how it came out.
I love the style guide. I'm going to hold this up for Ben and Megan, but I listened to it right away, but I only really opened the liner notes in the last couple days. So yeah, seeing the style guide, just, oh man, I'm going to listen to it in a totally different way now. So it's it's
like super informative. Yeah, when I first saw that too, it was like, obviously me as a student of all that, I knew all of those styles going into it, but it's sort of the perfect thing for the listener to just open up that so that they know what's happening.
Yeah.
And not to I know I mentioned this earlier, but I'm telling you, if you want to learn, I'm talking about depth of study, go to that index in the back, and there's every term you could want to know about Afro-Cuban, Brazilian, and Trinidadian music is essentially there.
Yeah.
So I think it'd be also a good resource for a lot of educators as well.
Yeah. Mike, Joe, any last words?
What Mixtacki said, this was a long process to put this record together, and the final product was what we had all hoped to hear when we first started talking about it 2 or 3 years ago. And at least for us, we hope that it can reach out to both novice and expert alike, aesthetically and then pedagogically. So if you wanted to really dig in and go, what Afro-Cuban stuff were they doing on that track, you can. Or if you just want to put it on and listen to it, hopefully it will just sound good. And at least in my personal opinion, I think we accomplished our goal, and we'll see if the public agrees with us.
My last thoughts would simply be that the three of us, Michael, Joe, and I, are Americans. It makes no sense to make a record that would basically just imitate what Afro-Cuban people can do much better than we could. What does make sense is to take that music and then, as it goes along, put your own creativity and your own artistic thoughts into it. And I would hope that that would inspire other people then to think along those same terms. Imitation may be the sincerest form of flattery, but as artists, it is our obligation and our duty to put out there who we are. And so both study and really learn a tradition, and then who are you within it as an artist. So I hope that would inspire, that this project would inspire others to do that same kind of thing.
Beautiful.
Very cool. Very cool. Hey, well, thank you, everybody. Michael Mixtacki, Michael Spiro, and Joe Galvin. It's so nice to see you all. And of course,
thank you guys. Thanks for having us.
Sure. You're very, very welcome.
Nice to meet all of you.
Nice to meet you, too.
Good to see you again. All right, Laurel, Megan, Ben, we'll catch you guys next time. And okay, everybody, thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao. Bye-bye.
Yeah.